Oh, we love when you talk, actually. This woman has changed my life through her talking. I'm like, don't stop talking, please, ever. Your voice is one of the most powerful voices I have ever had in my life. So, Jason, dang, this is the kind of guy I wish he lived here. This is the kind of human being you just want to do life with. You just want to. When you're around him, his voice alone is enough to I'm like, if I was a woman. He's married, sorry, that just to be clear on this, with beautiful children. And so, but he goes after the dreams that God has put on his heart, to be honest with you, better than almost anybody I know, with tremendous faith, with tremendous risk involved in the process, because God has put something in his heart. And whether it is he's written books, I'm like, come on, amazing books. He is a talented and amazing musician with albums out there. He is somebody who is now being involved more so in the movie world after fighting and fighting to see this script come to life. Multi-million-dollar movies. We're not talking yeah, I got my iPhone and I'm going to do a YouTube video. You're going to love it. It's going to be great. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about full-blown production and with names that you know, and that's one of two that's it's just insane what God is doing through this gentleman. And he's been in Iceland, one of my dream places, doing filming. I'm like, I want to go to Iceland to do a film, and I know nothing about film. And so God just has had his favor on this person, but even more important than all of that, he carries such a message of the Father and the Father's heart and that understanding, and he walks in it. He walks in it with his family. He walks in it with every life that he comes into contact with. And I'm in love with a man. I mean that in every way possible. And somebody else fell in love with him yesterday. I was a little jealous because we were at the conference in Rochester yesterday, and Jason just happened to stroll into the room at midnight, because after the conference, we were invited over to the house where everybody was meeting, and the only seat left in the room, so unfortunate, was right next to Danny Silk. And so I've never had real conversation with Danny Silk, and I look over and I'm like, God loves Jason, because Jason is sitting there engaging with Danny Silk back and forth, and I'm like, that's awesome. That's really awesome. And so there's favor on this man's life. There's a gift of love and of friendship that's just so apparent, and it's our pleasure to have him in our house today with us. And so, Jason, I love you, man. Thanks for being here with us.
Dude, love you guys. That's the introduction of a lifetime right there. Love you. Wow. I did sit next to Danny. My daughter snuck a picture of it. And you guys know Danny Silk? I got a picture of Danny Silk giving a Danny Silk face. I'll show it to you later. It's going to go on my Facebook wall. Listen, I honestly love you guys, and I said this in the first service, but there's something, we were at a conference a little bit together earlier this week, and I heard the phrase, holding someone in your heart, and I hold you guys in my heart in this place, and there's something powerful about running together, and I love you guys. And we love when you visit, and you can spend more time next time with us. I've been on the road, and I've been here since I came in 2014, and then last year I came. So it's so good what God's doing here. It's so good. There's been. Bro, I love you too, by the way. I love you too.
I love you too.
I saw you. Yeah. This feels like family, and more so every time I come. And well done, the grace of God, the open heaven over this place. Listen, you are a walking encounter, but there's this thing that takes place on a Sunday morning when there's family, right? The kingdom looks like family, right? The name of our ministry is A Family Story, because if it isn't family, it isn't kingdom. And I am getting to play on a lot of playgrounds, and I was saying this in the first service. There's a few things I've learned in a lot of sandboxes, I guess. I'm getting to play in a lot of sandboxes. There's a few things I've learned. I've got some books. They're back there. I really think they're life-changing. That's as much as I'm going to say about them.
Yes, I agree.
But I was saying, there's two ways to get a hold of what God's called on your life. One is what most excites you and most terrifies you, right? Like that place where you're like, oh man, like I couldn't imagine if I did that. Oh my goodness, that's really scary to take a step in that direction, right? Like you can kind of get a sense of what God's placed on your life by what most excites you, most terrifies you. I wrote a book called Surrendered and Untamed. It's basically this: to the extent that we are surrendered, to the extent that we are aligned, to the extent that we're walking out of intimacy, to the extent that we're close to Him, grounded and rooted and established in His love, is the extent that we can passionately chase these areas, just wildly chase after these places, these promises in our life. So one of the ways that you know what God has called you to, and I love to tell this to especially young people, is what are you most excited about? What are you most terrified by? Like, that's a good sign. But the second thing, and the thing that I'm learning as I get older, is it's about family. The way that you discover, and the reason that we're right on the cusp of making a film. My brother's a filmmaker, and he's been pushing this for 20 years. And one of the other ways that you discover, one of the callings on your life, is you find a family and you lay your life down for them. You find your people, that place that resonates, that place that hosts the yes of heaven over your life, that place that champions you and then you champion them. And when that happens, when you find your people and you begin to lay your life down, what you'll discover is, you might discover it cleaning toilets, or you might discover it loving on babies. My wife loving on babies. I get to see glimpses. I have a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And I'm getting to see glimpses of Grandma and my wife. She's sexy. I like her. So good. Yeah, I got sidetracked. One of the ways that you find who you are. You might not know this about yourself. You might not even realize that you have a grace in this area of your life until you've laid your life down for family. And you begin to lay your life down for family in this area, and all of a sudden you find, I'm good at this. You go meet a need, and you realize, oh, I'm good at meeting that need. And you would have never discovered it if you didn't lay your life down for family. And then there's the thing about it is that their favor becomes your favor, and your favor becomes their favor. So we're on the cusp of making movies, and faith-based movies that are going to release the kingdom, and we're leaning into it hard, and it's because I've discovered some of who I am and some of my favor and family. Burning this morning. He's a good dad. He's a good dad. Hi. There's this parable of the sower. You heard it? I'm going to tell you, you may hear it a little differently here this morning. The sower, it's a parable about the sower. And the sower takes seed, right? You know the story? Jesus tells it. I have it here somewhere. I'm just going to tell it to you. He takes a seed and he throws it on the path, right? You know the story? He throws it on the path. And then he throws it on the path. The birds come, they eat it up. And then he takes this seed and he throws it on a rocky soil. And it grows, but then the soil's not strong enough to support the plant. The sun comes out, withers and dies. You know this? He throws it on the weedy soil, the thorny soil, and the thistles and the thorns grow up with the plant, but they choke it out. You know the story? And then finally, good soil. And good soil that reaps 160 and 30-fold, right? I want to paint a picture for you. This is what it looks like for me. I would always read this parable, and I would always think, oh, I want to be good soil. Oh, that's good. I want to be good soil. But here's what I've discovered. I've discovered the power of seed. The truth that sets you free. And the sower, what's he doing? Wasting 3/4 of his seed. Just throwing it out there willy-nilly, just like he's got seed to spare, Like what sower throws on a road? I'll just throw this seed on the road. And I'll throw this seed on that stony soil. Anybody in here a farmer that you don't, what's he doing? This is a parable about a sower. I want to give you a picture. He sows it on the road, and this is what I believe. I believe this with all of my heart, the power of seed. It lands on the road, and before the birds can take it up, it's changed the nature of the road. And it's become kind of rocky. And he throws seed on rocky soil. What's he thinking? Rocky soil. Okay. But when the seed falls on the rocky soil, it changes the nature of the soil because the seed is more powerful than the soil. And it becomes thorny soil. And he throws it on. And again, changes the nature until good soil. We have good soil. It's pretty cool, huh? Let me, amen. Let me paint a picture for you so you can see it scripturally. You got Joshua and Caleb. You know the story? They go into the promised land with, you got 400 years of slavery. You've got an entire nation on the border of their promise. And you've got Joshua and Caleb along with 10 others. They sent 12 spies into this promised land. This is the promised land. God has promised them this land, right? And they go into the promised land and they spy out the land. And they come back and they all give the same report. What's the report? It's flowing with milk and honey. It's a good place. Like, this is the promised land. And it's got like melons, little melons the size of watermelons. And watermelons, I said earlier, like watermelons the size of Volkswagens. Like, this is a good place, right? Like, this is the promise. So they also agreed that there were giants in the land, right? They all agreed. They came back with the same report. Giants in the land, giants that aren't going to give us this land, giants that are going to try and kill us. But 10 of them gave the report from Earth's perspective, a fear-based perspective. They said, we are but grasshoppers in their sight. But 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, they knew who he was, they knew who they were, and they knew what he'd promised them, right? And so they had his perspective. Faith is his perspective. And so they begin to live out this faith. Now, we know the story from hindsight. When you read it, I know the story from hindsight. I almost gloss over. There's 40 years that take place, right? The promised land is withheld from an entire generation for their unbelief. And we read it and we know that story, and we know that an entire generation had to die before they could go into the promised land, right? You know the story? And so we tend to read it from that perspective. But if you get right on the ground with Joshua and Caleb, imagine, because Joshua and Caleb, they are the ones that lead the next generation in. We know the story, right? You get on the ground with Joshua and Caleb, this is what's actually taking place. The power of seed. Joshua and Caleb, they start having meetings. Caleb's, that's Caleb, crazy Caleb over there. And he's having Tuesdays with crazy Caleb. And only 3 people are coming, his wife and his son. He doesn't even want to be there. Right? And they're having meetings. Listen, Joshua's having Thursday at Joshua's house. And everywhere they go, they're saying, we know who he is. We know who we are. We know what he's promised us. And they're sowing seed. They're sowing seed, and it's a road. They're sowing seed on a road. Here's what didn't happen. They didn't sit around, because this is not how faith works. They didn't sit around and wait for a generation to die. We'll just sit here and wait quietly. Oh, man. Hezekiah, he's got longevity in his line. Somebody throw a stick when he gets old, hopefully trip over it. When there's 3 left. That's not what was happening. Right? That's not how faith works. What you had 2 believers sowing seed for 40 years. And for 10 years, they sowed on a pathway. Birds were eating it up. People were walking by their house, walking by their tent. Crazy Caleb, man, stay away from that guy. That guy's crazy. And he's walking around going, I know who I am. I know who he is. I know who I am. I know what he's promised us. And 20 years go by, and all of a sudden there's rocky soil, and a few people are hanging out, maybe listening. But mostly it's still crazy Caleb and crazy Joshua. 30 years go by, and all of a sudden, 35 years go by, and some young people are hanging out at Caleb's tent. I know who he is. I know who I am. We can take the land. 40 years, good soil. 2 men. And the power of seed changed 400 years of orphan thinking. 10 generations of slave mindset in 1 generation. Changed by 2 men who knew who he was, knew who they were. Knew what he'd promised. That's the power of seed. Got all my eggs in that basket. This house knows who he is, knows who we are, knows what he's promised. And I'm so excited about what he's doing. I find it's true, if you think about your life, I find it true in my life. I've got places that are roads, places that are rocky. So I believe, you need to hear me. I believe in being good soil. That's good. I'm not saying that there's nothing on. I want to be good soil. But aren't you glad for the power of seed? Look at your life and see where the good seed, where the truth that sets you free has come in. It's changed things in you. That's why God's generational. Just thinking of family is the long game. Did you know that? We're in it to win it. So I believe I'm a principled man. I'm a man of discipline. Passionate. But I want to tell you something. I've learned something. My passion isn't get to the end of my life and we have a funeral and hopefully there's some people there. But my passion isn't that they go, he was a principled man, a man of high character, a disciplined man. My passion is that they would say he was a man of intimacy. He was a good dad, good husband. He is loved by God. And every time I met him, I met my Father. Every time I was with him, I had an encounter. How many understand the point is intimacy? Every principle that leads to life came from intimacy. And every principle you apply should take you into intimacy, where you've missed the point. My passion is that people would have an intimate encounter with him. My desire in my own life is that I would be a man of intimacy. That when they say, I know Jason, they say, I know that man knew the Father. And he was one with the Father. Listen, the mandate, and we've had really good teaching on this over the last 10 years, and a yes and amen over it. The mandate is on earth as it is in heaven, right? Everyone in here is meant to make the impossibles bend the knee to the possible. To the God of impossibilities. And we got good teaching on it. And I yes and amen it. But I want to tell you that while the mandate is on earth as it is in heaven, the strategy and implementation is found when Jesus said to his disciples, I pray that you would be one, just as we are one. Just as I'm in the Father and the Father's in me, so too that you would be in me and in the Father. I pray that you would know intimacy. Years ago, I've had some amazing God times. I got saved when I was 5, and so many different moments in my life where I can see seed being sown into my life, the power of seed. And years ago, about 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, I heard a message that highlighted an area of my life and a shift in my life, took me on this amazing journey. And the message, essentially, the speaker gave this one thought. I'm laying it now, and we're going to conclude with it. But he said this. He said, a relationship, and this hit me hard. He said, a relationship where the son is always desperate for the father is dysfunctional. When my daughter was born, my firstborn, you had kids. He's got them. You've been in the room. You're in the room. They hand you this precious little girl. I couldn't believe they actually let me hold her. I was afraid I'd drop her. I remember driving home I remember wheeling my wife out, which is really confusing because she could walk. Like you wheel her to the curb and then she gets up and they're like, see ya, and they wheel. But there was policy to wheel her, they had to wheel her. And so they're wheeling her out. She's got the baby. And I'm like, we've been, we have this baby. And they wheel her and we get to there. And then they say, bye. And they turn around and I'm like, where are you going? You leaving us alone with this baby? Like, oh my God. Like driving home like 20 miles under the speed limit. Like white knuckling it, like fragile. Baby on board. Like I needed like 7 signs, baby on board. Used to make fun of that. Now I get it. Used to make fun of student driver too. I don't anymore. 2 student drivers. I'm like, hey, student driver, dude. Student driver. Stop honking. I remember when they handed her to me. I was in love. Remember when you could hold their head in the palm of your hand and the body splayed out on your arm and their little legs dangling on each side of your elbow. And you just a thought. This is. I have a little more time, so I'm allowing my mind to ramble a little further today. But you guys are a sloppy wet church. Just so you know, you're a sloppy wet kiss church. You are. I find unforeseen kisses a little creepy. If you think about it. Right? Sloppy wet. Have you ever had a sloppy wet kiss from a baby? They're teething, their mouths open. And they drool coming down there, and you get your nose in the whole thing, and you're like, this is amazing. I'm a sloppy wet kiss person. I'm holding her in my arms. And I looked at her and I said, hey, we'll see how you do. You can have some of my love and we'll see how you do. I looked at her and I went, you're beautiful. Now, let's see what you can earn from me. I looked at her and I said, listen, I'm going to give you some favor and then we'll see how you handle that. I'm going to withhold. No, I looked at her and I said, everything I have is yours. Everything I have is yours. All that I am, all my grace, all my love, all my affection, all the money. I don't have a lot, I'm sorry, but the little bit I have, I'll make more, I promise. It's all yours. You ever sang this song? And I am desperate for you. You sang that song? Yeah. It's a good song. I've had great God encounters. I want to give you a picture now. I have a secret desire. I'm going to get sarcastic now. I'm just giving you a warning, okay? Because I'm talking like it's intimate, but it's going to get funny in a second. All right, you ready? I have a secret desire to have. It's not secret now. I'm telling you to have my kids follow me around and sing that song. Wouldn't that be sad? I need my kids to be desperate for my affection. I'm going to withhold a few things from them. And, I love it when they're starving and then I can feed them a little bit. It makes me feel so good. Told you I was being sarcastic. It's just, what kind of father do we think he is? Last thing I want is my kids ever doubting my affection. They're walking around singing that song to me, and that's their love language to me. I failed somehow. I'm not knocking the encounter that I've had with God in that song. I've had amazing encounters because he's good. But I'm telling you right now, he doesn't want desperate kids. Jesus didn't come to show us our desperation or to make us more desperate. He came to reveal the Father and show us what it looks like to live sure in his affection. And then he purchased that same access to that affection for us so that we would be able to walk this planet confident in who he is, confident in who we are, taking the promise. It's really hard to do greater works when you're following him around desperate for just one scrap of his affection. Matthew 17, Jesus is he's spending some time with his Father. Now, Jesus came to show us the Father. Oh, you know what? I didn't go. Let me stop. I'm going to say something. I said this in the first service. I've only shared this a couple times. I feel like if I'm doing it, I have to unpack it right. But I want to tell you right now that he came to show us Father. God has a lot of names, but he called him Dad. All kinds of names, but he called him Dad. And one of the things that I want to go after, one of the things that I'm passionate about, listen, there is in heaven no language of master and slave. That's a very earthly concept. It happened after the fall. Master, slave. I'm not undermining obedience. He's the creator, we're the created. But you can obey as a son. Jesus was the greatest servant of all. He put himself as a servant, but never left being a son. Does that make sense? He came to win back for us access to the family. He used some of the language, so did Paul, but never left sonship. What he was saying, what Paul was saying. When Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7:22, the one who is free was called, when called, as Christ's slave. These verses can be confusing if we don't realize that the good master Paul is serving is also the good father Jesus revealed in the parable of the prodigal son. They're one and the same. Paul was not saying God is in control of me or God is forcing me as a master over a slave. He was saying I freely and joyfully lay my life down at his feet because he's a good dad. He wasn't saying the master makes me do things I don't want to do. How many know when you're interacting with God based as a slave to a master, it feels like he's making you do things you don't want to do? But the reality is what Paul is saying is as a son, he's using that language, but he's not saying, I have to do things I don't want to do. What he's saying is, I only want to do the things on my Father's heart. Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son, but I'd call it it's really a story about the good father. And what he's telling us a story about a son who doesn't know the nature of his father, really doesn't have access to his inheritance, which, by the way, is his father's nature, and is actually relating to his father from the fallen paradigm of slave master, and eventually says, I got to get out of the house. He takes his dad gives him some money, and he goes and he spends it in every self-centered way conceivable till there is a depression in the land. He's out of money. You know the story? He ends up finding himself serving pigs, working for a master that wasn't very good. In the context of slave master, he finds himself working for a master that isn't good. And in that slave context, master, where he's feeding pigs and they're eating better than he is, he has a memory that his father is what? A good master. And so he goes, Here's the language. Jesus is showing us, look, I'll use this language for you, but I want to introduce you to something way greater than this. And he says this prodigal son goes, my father is a good master. He's remembering how he treats his servants. And he says, I'll go back to him. And there's this repenting taking place in his heart. And he goes back to him. And as he's coming up the road, you know the story, the father runs out to meet him. And he has a cloak and he has the sandals and he has the ring. And there's so much good teaching about identity and about calling and about legacy and royalty and all that stuff's taking place. And the son is seeing his father. But here's what took place on the way to see his father. A revelation of good master brought him home, but it didn't bring him home into the house of the master. It brought him home into the arms of his father. If you don't have an encounter with the master that takes you into the arms of the father, you've missed the whole point. And then you have an older son who comes in, and he also knows the father is a master. You know how we know this? He's not able to participate in the celebration. Listen, when you're not able to participate in the celebration, well, let me say this. He comes home, he's not able to participate in the celebration. The father runs out to meet him, and he says, you've never thrown me a party, and I've been slaving. And it's the language he said, I've been slaving in your fields. I never left, I've been slaving for you. And the father goes, why are you doing that, son? And he says this, everything I have is yours. No slaving required. Here's the thing about not leaving slavery to step into sonship. You will actually find yourself counter to what he's doing on the planet. The older son couldn't even come in and participate in the joy and the fellowship of his father and his brother, because slavery will keep you outside of how he moves. It will keep you outside of intimacy. That language doesn't exist in heaven. You can use it on earth. You use it always as a son or a daughter. Look at, he's my master, but he's my daddy. I obey him. I get his heart. I become like him. And I don't have to force myself. I operate out of intimacy. And my faith is birthed out of that place. Jesus is, in Matthew 17, spending some time with his father. It's the Mount of Transfiguration. He's up there with Peter, James, and John. And you know it. It's just glorious, right? You heard the story. Lightning bolts, and his face is glowing. And Peter gets silly up there. You know the whole story. Meanwhile, down in the valley, the other disciples are ministering. And a father brings his son who's possessed by a demon, and the demons cause the son to throw himself in the fire. And the father brings his son to the disciples, and they pray for him. They aren't able to cast the demon out. They're supposed to, but they aren't able to do it. And then Jesus comes down the mountain. He's just been in the greatest worship service, right? Like he's just been in the presence. He's charged, he's full, he's just wrecked. What is that? Reckless love. Yeah, that's a good word. And he comes down the mountain, and the father takes his son to Jesus. And he says he has seizures and is suffering greatly, and he often falls into the fire or into the water. Verse 16, Matthew 17. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. And Jesus looks around and he says, you unbelieving, perverse generation. Listen, it sounds harsh, but it wasn't. Look, he'd come to seek and save. What he was saying is, my heart is broken for the flaw in your lens. My heart is broken. He says, the messenger says, what a generation. No sense of who he is. No focus to your lives. And then Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with this? How many times the messenger said, how many times do I have to go over these things? Sounds harsh, it really isn't. Jesus is looking at it going, oh. It's like when he wept over Lazarus. He wept because he was weeping with those who wept, but he was also weeping because of the inability to know who the Father was. And he saw this broken place of death and said, oh, my heart is heavy. And he says, bring the boy to me. Rebuked the demon. The demon came out of the boy, of course. Right? And he was healed at that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked why we couldn't drive it out. Jesus tells us in one of the other Gospels that this kind only comes out through prayer and fasting. And if you understand that Jesus had just come down a mountain, he hadn't gone off and prayed and fasted to do it, which means he was living a lifestyle of prayer and fasting. But really, what it means is he's living a lifestyle of intimacy. So he comes down the mountain, and here in Matthew, it says, the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, why couldn't we drive it out? And he replied, because you have so little faith. And he uses this measurement word. He says, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Here it is. Nothing will be impossible to you. And Jesus demonstrated that for 3 years, for 33 years. Nothing will be impossible to you. That is the great mandate on us, the greater works. Nothing, thy work on earth as it is in heaven, nothing will be impossible to you. One of the greatest moments of my life, this isn't going to sound profound, but I'm unpacking it, so stick with me. We were in a dire situation. I've been through 2 financial things that went pretty deep. The first one, we white-knuckled that ride. Following God. So when I say I got a yes from God, I went at something all in, and then he said not a day late, not a day early regarding my finances, and I learned firsthand that his sense of timing is different than mine. He said not a day late. What year are you in? Good. I know you live outside. I'm over just checking. When he talks to me now, I ask him what year he's in while he's talking to me. What year are you in? Just out of curiosity. And that first ride, I white-knuckled it. Oh, God. I'm here with you. We're in it. The second time, financially, but I'd learned something in between. The second time, I learned to be a son. Financially, way worse. I mean, we went 18 months without paying our mortgage. And God redeemed that powerfully because he's a relentless redeemer. But we're in it, and we're just sleeping in the boat. That makes sense, right? He's good. He's good. I remember my wife opening the pantry and the fridge trying to figure out what to feed the family that day. There wasn't much in there, and she said, oh, thank you, Lord. You're so good. And I remember thinking, we're all right. We're okay. And I'm in that season, and my favorite verse, Ephesians 3:16. It's 16 through 20, Ephesians 16 through 20. And it's that love verse. I want you to know the love of God. How high and deep and wide is the love, and long is the love of Christ. And to know this love that surpasses knowledge, to be filled to the measure of the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine. And I'm remembering this verse, and I'm out mowing the yard, and this is a season where, we had gas for the mower, like, yay, God, right? And I'm mowing the yard, and God begins to speak to me. He says this is the most profound thing, shifted everything. He said, Jason, Jesus never lived for beyond all you can ask or imagine. He lived from it. And I went, whoa! I did. I was like, oh, man, mind blowing. He'd been sowing seed into a revelation. Because you have so little faith. This is what he says to the disciples. They say, hey, why couldn't we cast this demon out? Like, it's just a little demon. We've done it time and time again. What's the deal? He says, you have too little faith. And they say, oh, how much faith do we need then? Like, thinking in the math of earth, 2 + 2 = 4. I have 2 faiths. I must need 2 more. Of course, Jesus feeds 5,000 with 3 fish and 5 loaves, so you know his math's a little messed up. Why? Because he is operating from sonship, not from slave. He's operating from a paradigm of love, from sovereign love, and not this ideology of master-slave control. So he's operating from love, and love is measureless. I tell this story all the time. I think I told it the first time I was here. Play the game with my kids. I love you to the trees and back. And then what do they say? I love you to the trees, the sun, the moon, the stars, right? And we go back and forth, and we measure our love for each other. And it's a game we all have played to some extent in our lives. God wants to play it with you, by the way, because this is the game. We're measuring something, and to our infinite delight, we're discovering that this is a measureless revelation. The moment you think you got it, it's times 2. My daughter I'll give her a long string of reasons why I love her, and she'll go times 2. We love the game. Why? Because we're playing a game of measurements with a measureless revelation. Jesus didn't live for the measureless. He lived from it. What does that mean? He says, you have too little faith, and it seems like he's talking in measurements. So the disciples say, well, how much faith do we need? And he says, well, much, just a mustard seed. Just the smallest seed I can think of, because we're not playing a measurements game. This is what he says. He says, it's not about, I want to read it. He wasn't talking about the size of your faith. He was talking about the purity of your revelation. He wasn't talking about the size of your actions or your words or your knowledge. He was talking about the size of your connection. Jesus had just come down the mountain, and he was expressing to them, it's about intimacy. It's about intimacy. You want to do the impossible stuff? You don't have enough faith. How much do we need? You don't need a big measurement of faith. You need a purity of revelation. On earth as it is in heaven is the mandate. I pray that you would be one, is how it's done. I got a few more minutes, so I'm going to tell you a couple more things. Are you ready? Jesus is going into the garden. Peter says, I'm with you, heart, soul. Jesus says, Peter, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. But I've been praying for, and hear this, I've been praying for your faith. Peter, I've been praying for a purity of revelation. And then he says, hey, dude, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter says, look at that. Before the rooster crows. Now listen. Satan, just real quick, Satan had access to Peter because he did not have a purity of revelation. A lot of times we read this and we think Jesus, like Satan was asking Jesus for permission. Peter's the one that gave Satan permission. God doesn't give Satan permission to play with us. God prays for our faith. And I'm not going to spend a lot more time unpacking that. Here's the reality. Faith simply believes this. He's good. He's good. I invite you into the tension. We have a saying in our house. I don't know, but he's good. I don't know, but he's good. Here's what I want to show you. Peter goes into the garden as a slave. You know how we know? He goes into the garden and he goes, oh, and he's He's got some sort of faith, but it's the kind of faith that's action. It's big actions. He brings a sword with him. And he says, this kingdom that God's going to establish on earth as it is in heaven is going to require men willing to die for Jesus. And also men willing to kill for him. And Jesus says, dude, put away your sword. You don't know what you're doing. You're operating counter to who I actually am. You're not being a son. You're being a slave. And you're desperate on my behalf. But you're really not desperate on my behalf. You're desperate protecting your thoughts about me, and they're wrong. He says, I'm praying for your faith. I'm praying for the purity of your revelation. And then he says, and when you are on the other side, turn and be life to your friends. That's what he tells Peter before they go in the garden. I'm praying, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. Because you have a flaw in your lens regarding my nature, he's got access to you, buddy. But don't worry, I'm praying for your faith. I'm praying for that mustard seed that isn't about the action that you're going to do when you get in there. It's not about your bootstraps. I'm praying for the purity of your revelation so that when you get it, Peter, you can turn and be life to your friends. And Peter goes into the garden. And he's got a flaw in his lens, and he goes into the garden. He brings that sword in there, and he understands that the kingdom, listen, he operated out of love for Jesus. But when you operate in desperation, you've missed him. He doesn't want desperate kids for a lot of reasons. He doesn't want desperate kids because he wants you confident in his affection. But desperate kids go around cutting people's heads off, or attempting to protect their ideology, their thoughts about God. When you're desperate on his behalf, your thoughts about God are wrong. So in that season where we had nothing, how you guys, you okay? Don't need to tell a joke. I told one earlier, last service. How do you get I'm not going to do a blonde joke. I feel like I can do it because I'm blonde. I'm feeling, I don't know. It's a little tense in here. Yeah, how do you get a blonde on a roof? You tell them drinks on the house. All right, I like what it feels like in here. That's good. We're in that season, and it's desperate. We're broke and all the rest of it. And I want to go to this conference. It's about 3 hours away in Raleigh, and we're in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I want to go to this conference, and we have $200. We're halfway through the month, and we need that $200. That's what we have in the bank account. We need tires on our car. We need tires. And I say to my wife, I feel like I'm supposed to go to this conference, but we need tires. She says, well, what takes more faith? Which, that's my wife, right? And I'm like, oh, okay. Now here's what I've discovered. See, I've been spending this time with God. Before I tell the story, I want to wrap up. A relationship with a son is always desperate for the father's dysfunctional, right? I'm in that season. Been chewing over that for a couple weeks. I go out for a run. I'm running, and it's 2 weeks later. I'm chewing. I know that's for me. I know there's something there. And God comes to me, and he meets me powerfully. I can show you the place on my run. I mean, just powerfully meets me. And he says, Jason, he says a whole lot of beautiful things to me, but the highlight for this morning, he says, Jason, insecurity is illegal for a son. And I went, whew. I said, so we're not doing that anymore. And then he said, son, am I a good father? And I said, yeah, of course. He said, well, then if there's dysfunction in our relationship, it's not on my end. And I went, oh, that's really good. That hurts good. He said, from this day forward, it's illegal for you to be insecure. And so by the time I got home, I'd repented. And repenting is simply, it's the most beautiful thing. You change the way you think. You think like he thinks. It's an about face. It's the goodness of God, the kindness of God, that leads to changing the way we think. We are transformed by the changing of the way we think. So it is an encounter with his kindness, his love. It's that intimate connection that actually brings transformation to our lives. So I'd encountered his kindness on that run. Oh, it's illegal to be insecure. And I said, God, from this day forward, I'm going to interact with you based on the measureless revelation of your love instead of the measurements of my experience. Jesus lived from the measureless. I'm going to try that. That seems like a really good idea. And I repented. By the time I got home, I said, I will no longer interact with you based on my needs. From this day forward, I will interact with you based on your love. You know, when you pray, on earth as it is in heaven, you say, on earth as it is in heaven, and then you say, give us this day our daily bread. There's a reason it's in that order. If on earth as it is in heaven comes first, you don't pray desperate for your bread. It's okay to pray for your bread, but he didn't want desperate kids. So, we're on our way to Raleigh. I decided I'm going to go to Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm going to this conference. Yes, God. I'm driving down the road and I'm talking to God and I'm talking to him, but I'm just telling him I love him. And the tires, right? We need new tires. And when we need new tires, I mean we need new tires. Anybody, yeah, just like they're just, you know, like it's the kind of thing where you're like, you feel it, right? And like you keep turning the radio up, but you can't turn it up anymore, right? And I'm not coming to God with my desperations. This is a season. I'm not going to interact with him that way. So I'm driving down the road and I'm like, God, you know, I'm not desperate, but, you know, tires. I need some, but, you know, because I'm not going to be like desperate for them, but we could use some new tires. So I'm like having that conversation, like, God, this is not a desperate plea, but yeah, we do need new tires, right? And God immediately says, do you have enough money for today? I'm like, oh, that's a hard answer. So yeah, I think maybe we do. So I get to the conference, I make it to the conference, and I'm there and fellowship and all this stuff, and I was really bummed because I wanted to go out to lunch with somebody. I wanted to connect. You guys all right? I got 5 more minutes. You all right? I wanted to connect, and it didn't happen. And I was so disappointed. I was so discouraged. And then nobody invited me to lunch, and I had no money, and I had very little faith. So I was just gonna go to Starbucks and have the cheapest coffee. I love Starbucks, but I wasn't gonna eat lunch. I was gonna fast because I was gonna be spiritual. Fast. And I'm not going to be desperate, but I'm also not going to eat because, this is stupid. What am I doing here? And I'm wrestling with all that. I get in the car and I drive honestly, it was so bad. I drive out of the parking lot and immediately I'm like, oh, I need new tires. And I'm like, God, not being desperate, but And he says, do you have enough money for today? And I said, okay. So I drive to right around the corner to a mom and pop shop. I go in. I didn't have enough money. So I drove, there were too much. So I drove to a Walmart. Thank God for Walmart. And I walk into the Walmart. And I get into the Walmart and I talk to the counter clerk. It's $170-something. I'm like, okay, I got enough money. So I say, all right. So I walk out and he says, just pull it right up to the front, whatever you call that, just that line, before you go in the garage. Just pull it up there. So I get in my car and I drive the minivan right up to this front garage. I get out, close the door, I walk around, I hand the keys to the attendant. As I hand the keys to the attendant, the front driver's side tire pops. And I'm like, do you see this, dude? And he says this, he says, you got somebody driving with you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you think? I almost literally saw the angel going, oh my God, thankful. Finally, I was trying to keep that tire alive for him. He says, well, do you have some faith, man? And so I am like giddy now. And I'm like, now I'm going to go to Starbucks and have the biggest drink they have. And I'm going to eat whatever order all of it. Like whatever's that leftover $12 is going to buy me. I got faith, right? I'm walking across the parking lot to the Starbucks. And as I'm walking across the parking lot, I'm starting to have these thoughts about it. Have you ever been in there? You're tight in the wallet. You get in there, and they say, "What do you want to do with the old tire?" And you're like, I have no idea. Inside, I'm going, what am I going to put it in my backyard? But you're also thinking, it probably still has some tread on it. Here's the deal. Like, if I have a trip and I think to myself, I need new tires, and then I take the trip and I come home, I'm like, winning, right? Because I got another 200 miles out of them. It just feels good. You know what I'm saying? Does this make sense? I'm walking across the parking lot and I'm thinking about these tires. I'm like, well done, tires. I'm laughing with God, having a great time. Like, well done, tires. You gave your last breath. Like, that's a great feeling. Like, I got everything I could ever get out of that tire. I feel so good about this. Like you took every inch you were meant to take. Well done, tire. And I'm laughing with God. I'm like, isn't that amazing? The tire gave me everything. I had like no waste. I got it all. And I'm walking across the parking lot. And I'm laughing, and suddenly I'm saying, literally, I'm talking about, well done, tire, well done. And then I have this memory of one of my heroes, Bill Johnson, says he's living for 5 seconds because he figures that's about how long it takes to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And I remember that, and I go, God, I want you to, I know this is silly, but I want you to feel about me the way I feel about this silly tire. And you know what he said? When I get to the end of life, I want you to feel about me. He said, son, I feel about you right now that way. He said, I always have, and I always will. Well done. Jesus went under the water, 30 years of age, comes up out of the water, and the Father says, way to go, buddy. You did it. I'm so pleased with you. And he hadn't done anything he's famous for. Jesus did everything from his Father's pleasure, not for it. Everything from his Father's grace, not for it. Everything from his Father's favor, not for it. Everything he has is ours. When Jesus grew in wisdom and favor with God and with man, when it comes to God, he already had all of God's favor. He grew in the revelation of it. Faith is the purity of your revelation. He is always good. He is love. He looks like Jesus. He doesn't deviate to the left or to the right. And we exist to grow more sure today than we did yesterday. More sure tomorrow than we were today. Would you stand? He doesn't want desperate kids. Jesus came to make us sure. He came to give us access to the Father, to show us what it looks like to live confident as sons and daughters. I want to pray a blessing over you, and I want to release what I carry. And I got a little grace in this area. And it's my passion that we would know him. Suddenly, ministry becomes easy. I'm in the Father's in me. Jesus only did what he saw his Father doing. On earth as it is in heaven, every impossibility is made possible. How? Out of intimacy. Father, I pray right now over this house. I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for the yes of heaven over this place. I thank you for the sons and daughters who are growing confident even today. I thank you that every master-servant relationship leads us into an encounter with the Father, and I release the Father's blessing over this place. I release the Father's grace over this place. Father, I release encounter over this place, and I invite a greater revelation, a purity of revelation. I release intimacy over every heart and every mind and every soul in this house. And Father, I just thank you. I thank you for what you're doing in this place, what you're doing in this town, what you're doing in Buffalo. And we say yes. We say yes. We say yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Lord, we're not desperate. We are hungry. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.